Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Come on now, come on. Good morning. Wake up. A few announcements before our immediate presentation. After each presentation, the speeches will be placed on the website under the title Press. And so you can access the presentations on the website under the title Press. To my right and through that door are the bathrooms for those who need to make access of it. And I know most people will have already known that, but for those who are coming in today for the first time, to my right, under that banner, is a door to access bathrooms. We have been affirmed and introduced, and everybody has been identified as special since we began this conference. So there's no need for further recognitions or affirmations this morning. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Andrew Holness. Yeah, you can come. He has been on the platform a few times before, so you all know him by now, so I won't get into any undue detail in the introduction. Nonetheless, I'll say a few things about him. Youthful, as you can see, the 9th Prime Minister of Jamaica. He has projected a view for inclusivity in governance. Served in various civic organizations and elected to representational politics, son of civil servants, an academic in his own rights, frequently has utterances as well as his inclination toward intellectually stimulating activities. You must find an opportunity to engage this man in a conversation. He has a commitment to what leaders should do, and he's unabashed about speaking his mind on those issues. Having taught for a short while himself, he's not a stranger to the academia. But despite his youthfulness, there's a bit of iron in his bones. And if you have a question about that, he recently was triumphant in a party, election in Jamaica, and stood his ground and came through a strong and heated battle successfully. Very strong and committed person, married with 2 young children. Most of all, in my own interaction with him, I get a sense that he's committed to transformation. And in listening to him informally speak about some of the issues we have been dealing with, I am convinced we are in for an engaging presentation. Topic: change in the ethical and anti-corruption framework. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Andrew Holness. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gardner. It is said that don't worry about that. It is said, I was just about to assure you, because it is said that a good speech is long enough, like a skirt, to cover the subject matter, but short enough to keep your attention. So I will be between those 2 extremes. I want to express my appreciation and honor at being given the opportunity to be keynote speaker at this very important anti-corruption conference staged at the University College of the Cayman Islands. And I want to extend my gratitude to the President of the UCCI, Mr. Roy Bodden, and Dr. Livingston Smith, the conference chair, and other key organizers of the conference, including some of Jamaica's local universities, and I must especially recognize the National Integrity Action, who collaborated in making this event possible. This is not my first time in the Cayman Islands. I was here maybe 10 years ago, and I would want to say that the Cayman Islands has progressed significantly since I've been here last. And it is a country that should take great pride in itself for what it has achieved. I certainly am impressed. But this is my first time here as leader of the opposition in Jamaica. Unfortunately, I was not Prime Minister long enough to pay you a visit. But I promise you that next time when I visit Cayman, I will be the Prime Minister. It is clear from the attendance at this conference by the representatives from various sectors, politics, the church, civil society, and academia, that corruption is of great concern to all, and it impacts various sectors of the society. It also highlights that in tackling this problem, a collaborative and cooperative approach needs to be taken. It is a fight for all of us, as we are all impacted by corruption, whether directly or indirectly. We all must rigorously, vigorously pursue the fight against corruption. There is no room for complacency or ambivalence. The theme of the conference, Towards a Corruption-Free Caribbean: Institutions, Ethics, Values, Trust, and Morality, clearly conveys the importance that is being attached to the fight against corruption within the Caribbean region. Some of our Caribbean countries have recorded, and I guess we must all agree, disappointing scores on the Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index for 2013. My own country, Jamaica, has a ranking of 83 out of 177 countries last year. And this is a ranking that we had the year before. It is a low score that we had, 38 out of 100 being the least corrupt. I am personally disappointed that we have not recorded significant improvements in our corruption perception index. We are not the only ones. Trinidad and Tobago faces a similar profile. Suriname faces a similar profile. Guyana faces a similar profile. Haiti faces a similar profile. But I don't want this to color our impression that the Caribbean is a corrupt place. And we do have countries in the Caribbean that are doing fairly well. Barbados registered a very impressive 15th rank in the index, and we should be proud of that. They lead the way for this region. The Bahamas, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica also show results that are worthy of note. So overall, the perception of the Caribbean is mixed. We are not all doing badly, and some are doing very well. But we can see that there are serious challenges in our territories. But let's focus on the good news. I think the good news is that right across the Caribbean, governments and our civil societies are taking up the anti-corruption agenda. that they are organizing, that they are putting in place legislation, and that they are moving generally towards establishing a framework to tackle corruption. In addressing corruption, we need to apply a broad definition and a more practical definition for the boundaries of corruption. In any human organization, leadership is inevitable. By definition, leadership makes decisions on behalf of the group that affects the welfare of the entire group. Leadership ultimately exercises discretion over the welfare of the group. The evolution of modern social organizations revolves around the creation of systems to control the use of discretion. We see this in the development of laws, constitutions, oversight of parliament, the spread of democratic principles, and the increasing mobilization and empowerment of the citizen through greater access to information, which leads to greater demand for accountability of their leaders and the use of their discretion, authority, and power. As our system to control leadership, decision-making, and power becomes more complex, in other words, we develop bureaucracies, the threat of misuse of discretion by leaders that affect the group or public welfare is now compounded by the threat of misuse of the bureaucracy or the public office that affects public welfare. From this perspective, corruption is not only an ailment that affects politicians or holders of elected office. Anyone who exercises a power of discretion or exercises the authority of an office, public or private, that impacts public welfare or public good and uses this discretion, this authority, in such a way as to secure personal benefits, deprive someone or a group of their rights, pervert systems of access, signaling, and distribution, or generally affect the public good or diminish public welfare, commits an act of corruption. This is a highly generalized definition, I will admit. But let us examine it in practical terms to see if it makes sense. Conceivably, not all corrupt acts are illegal. It should therefore follow that though an act may not be legal, or rather, though an act may be legal, it doesn't mean that it is not corrupt. All it means is that society has not yet decided to regulate the act. For example, the music industry in Jamaica is negatively affected by the practice pay for play. We call it payola, that's the term adopted to describe the practice. And this is an act where an office holder, in this case the DJ, accepts pay outside of his contracted remuneration from his employer, a bribe, to give access outside of the accepted and expected process of accessing the airwaves to someone to have their songs given heavier rotation. This, of course, deprives the musician who follows the right process, who has a right to expect that the right process would be used to select the song. It deprives him of the possible benefit that he could get from having his song played. But more than that, there is a deeper concern. And the deeper concern is that the songs that are often being heavily rotated have social messages that challenges the established value systems which affect the public good and possibly diminish public welfare. So here is an action. It's not illegal yet in Jamaica. It was made illegal in the United States. It's probably illegal in other countries. It's a corrupt act. It's not carried out by an elected office holder or a publicly appointed office holder. But it has such an impact on the public welfare, on the public good. It perverts systems of access. It perverts signaling mechanisms. It perverts distribution mechanisms. It's corrupt. And there are other such actions. For example, insider trading, price fixing, that affect how economic systems operate. That potentially could create financial crises. These are corrupt acts which must be regulated, must be dealt with. And so I wanted the conference to broaden its scope when it thinks of corruption. And I'm deliberately doing this not to let off politicians. I'm deliberately doing this because I want to give a deeper understanding to connected persons. All those are now rolled up into a public relations campaign, which, by the way, has been very effective. I must acknowledge the former Contractor General, Mr. Greg Christie, who, by his work, has single-handedly elevated the importance of the anti-corruption framework in Jamaica. The present Contractor General is here, Mr. Dirk Harrison, and I know that he's filling your shoes, Greg, and he's doing a wonderful job. I don't usually make these kinds of compliments because it's not politic to do so. But you have to admit when public officials are doing their jobs. So there is no question that the anti-corruption framework in Jamaica is highly publicized, elevated, that there is civil society action, that there is public education, that there is a thrust towards new legislation. And at this point, let me say that the government last Friday introduced in the Senate a new anti-corruption bill, and that bill seeks to create a single anti-corruption institution. I want you to reflect on what I said earlier. So, in the march of time, governments, people, societies have responded by creating bureaucracies to curb the use of discretion which could have a negative impact on public welfare and the public good. Over time, the development of the bureaucracy has been disparate and sometimes uncoordinated. So some countries have several regulatory bodies and agencies all trying to control corruption. So the new phase of anti-corruption framework development in my mind, reading the literature, seems to be trying to bring order to the existing bureaucracies that deal with anti-corruption. So surprisingly, there is a movement towards creating single anti-corruption institutions with one overarching legislation, and giving that single anti-corruption agency prosecutorial and investigative powers. That's a good thing, but I'm certain you would smile with me that we are now back at where we started, where we are now looking at placing the discretion of managing anti-corruption in the hands of a czar. It's something that we have to reflect on. Now, clearly, not a czar in the historical sense, but nonetheless, one person with discretion. I make the point, to make a deeper point, that the fight against corruption really depends on the integrity of leadership. Because whoever occupies the office of the czar must be someone of integrity. So I just want it to be clearly understood that yes, we are moving in the right direction, but we have to look very carefully and don't lose sight of the important thing, that governments or whatever the mechanisms that may be put in place to select the anti-corruption czar must ensure that that person is of the highest integrity. And I would also want to say of the highest rationale and judgment. We look at countries that have followed the model, and they have worked, which is why I support it. Sierra Leone, commissioner is here. I had a long talk with him, and I'm very impressed with the work that you have been doing in your country. Singapore, Netherlands, you could name it. Many countries have gone that route because it makes sense. If you're going to tackle corruption, you have to coordinate all the agencies and coordinate the legislation. But you asked me today to speak about my vision for the anti-corruption framework of Jamaica. What would I want to see? So yes, I support the evolution of the anti-corruption framework. I believe there are some things that we may need to do to improve that. And what I'm about to say, I've said to Professor Monroe, that I think that in an environment of low trust, which currently exists in Jamaica, you have to be careful that in the public relations campaign, you don't destroy all the trust. Because what you could very well end up doing is making the structures look so bad that people don't have interest anymore. They don't participate. So the public relations campaign about improving the anti-corruption framework must be how to get the citizens to engage more. And so the public relations campaign has to be a little bit more discerning than it is now. The legislative process needs to move much faster than it is moving. And government needs to stop being so ambivalent about the anti-corruption framework. And we have seen that in our present government. When they were the opposition, they joined the present, well, they joined the contractor general, former contractor general, in demanding accountability of the government through the competitive tender process. But when they became the government, they rejected the competitive tender process and did even more than that. They took their own anti-corruption agency to court for the court to establish that they don't have the power to investigate the pre-contract stages of contracts, a power which the very parliament gave. So, we need to stop being ambivalent. The society needs to stop being ambivalent, because there is a view secretly held by many that we must allow the thing, make runnings go on. And I'm sure every Caymanian understand what I'm saying. There is a view to free up the thing, make people can survive. So those kinds of ambivalence in dealing with corruption, we need to sort those out. And of course, the important sorting out agent is the leadership. So what would I like to see happen for our anti-corruption framework? Well, I return to what I started with: bureaucracy. Jamaica is 51 years old, 52 years old, August this year. We have 300 years of colonial government, 500 years of colonialization, many institutions in place. So we are not short of the bureaucratic attempt to control the use of discretion, power, and authority. So the corruption challenge is not just what your leaders do in the use of their discretion, but it is also what the bureaucracies do in the use of their authority. I have not studied this, but I throw it out as a challenge. I'm in a university, that it would be good to study to see which is the larger extent of corruption. Is it the corruption of leaders, or is it the corruption that takes place in bureaucracy, as separate and distinct from the leaders they are put to curb? I would say that much of the corruption takes place within bureaucracies. It happens for many reasons. Let's look at them. So we always tick the first box, that men will sin. They will do things that are immoral, things that are wrong. So yes, human nature, and that goes across the board. But corruption will also happen because sometimes bureaucracies have lost their relevance. They have lost their mandate. And so they exist to satisfy themselves. If you look at Jamaica and you were to write down all the organizations, all the institutions that make up Jamaica, that would become the bureaucracy. And then you could ask yourself the question, how many of these institutions still continue to be relevant to the development of Jamaica today? I'm certain that you would apply that to your own country, and you could start to reflect, do we really need this organization? Do we really need that commission? Do we really need that ministry? Is that department really relevant? And so what we have are organizations that can be easily captured because they do not have a mandate. And from time to time in Jamaica, we see agencies that fall to corruption because the leadership, the basis on which it was established, they have lost their mandate, or they don't have a mandate. And so it's easy for the organization to be captured for self. And so what I would want to do for Jamaica is to do an institutional review. If we are going to chart and build a new Jamaica, we can't do it with old institutions. The government has to look at every institution, every ministry, every agency, every organization and say, what is your role and what will you contribute to national development? And give them a mandate. Without that, then people are only trying to keep their jobs. And there are too many institutions who are only serving themselves. So that's one reason, the self-serving nature of bureaucracies. Whenever they lose their mandate, they become self-serving. The other reasons, and I'm going to focus on one in particular, which I must do for Jamaica, is that there are many organizations that exist for important reasons. For example, to guard government revenue. And I'm now here thinking of customs. I'm thinking of the Inland Revenue Department, where by virtue of the business process engaged, it gives the opportunity for corruption. So interestingly, an important tool in fighting corruption is actually improving the business processes of bureaucracies. As it turns out, the flip side of inefficiency is corruption. Whenever you see an inefficient organization, rest assured, there is corruption happening somewhere. And so the Jamaican government must seek to improve the efficiency of all its institutions. It mustn't leave any fat. And if new technologies exist that can deliver the service faster, make sure that that technology is employed. I want to just make what I'm saying very practical so that people can relate to it. We wonder why it is that it takes so long for approvals for simple things to be given in Jamaica. And other countries may have the same experience. Well, one of the first things is that the approvals agencies don't have a mandate for national development. They are not part of the mandate for economic growth. They probably don't understand what their contribution could be to economic growth. But more than that, they use processes that are outdated. Let's take, for example, the process of licensing and certifying the roadworthiness of motor vehicles. If you speak to a Jamaican, they will complain how long it takes and how difficult it is. And how they have to pay for a service that they have already paid for. Well, the government could very well employ better processes. It could look at this institution and say, is it necessary for this institution to still be under the auspices of the government? I mean, is this really the role of government if we are going to rethink an efficient bureaucracy? No, that service could very well be contracted out and operated under commercial terms, which would be more efficient. That's part of the process of improving the bureaucracy which cuts out corruption, which affects the public good. I hope I use that example to concretize the generalized principle. And I would like to see these things happen in Jamaica. But it comes down to one important thing. What does the citizen want? Especially if we speak in the democratic and free context of Jamaica. What does the citizen want? Does the citizen want the situation to remain as it is so that they can eat a food, keep their job, without recognizing that they could have a bigger plate and a better job if the systems were changed? And how do we as politicians engage people who feel that they are victimized on the fringe of society and that the only way that they will ever get anything from society is by engaging in acts that are considered corrupt and illegal? How do we bring them in to the understanding that efficiency can also be equitable? It starts with, I believe, public education. Not the kind that the NIA is doing, though that is important. But it starts with the reintroduction of a solid course of civics. Not one that skirts around the issues in our society, but one that deals with them frontally. For example, when will we regulate extra lessons in our schools? Is that fair? Doesn't that affect the public good? But would that ever appear in a civics book? So, lots of work to be done. I believe I'm up to the task, and I'm very happy to have been given the chance to express these ideas. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you ever so much. Now the speech has been given, so we're not anticipating a speech from anybody. We're allowing a few questions and not a speech. I will stop you if you attempt to give a speech. Few questions because of time. And I see a hand here and one in the back. The mic can go in. Move around quickly. And there's a hand in the back next.
Hi, good morning. My name is Rachel, and my question is very simple. What do you believe would be appropriate steps to take for internal party discipline in addressing corruption? Because elections and government come after, but the issues start at party level before you become a government minister.
Well, there are two things that need to happen. The first thing is that within our kinds of democracies, political parties are not recognized. So constitutionally, they are not required to be regulated. And so the very first thing is that for the society to acknowledge that there is such a thing as a political party and stop treating it as the invisible hand in Parliament, which means that you have to now develop regulations to register political parties. So I would encourage countries to start developing that kind of regulation so that political parties have to come and register, they have to declare, they have to be transparent. Secondly, the political parties have to set standards for themselves. The standard setting process can be challenging, and I'm speaking from first-hand experience, because in a diverse country, diversity will be a part of the political party. But that is an ongoing internal process for which the public can be very helpful, because in truth, it is not just who the political party accepts, it is also who the public elects. And so that plays a great part in determining what will be the integral standing of the political party. But I believe it is necessary for political parties to establish their own standards of integrity, probity, fit and proper. I could not stand here and not say, Professor Monroe would certainly give me a lecture afterwards, that the whole business of campaigning and campaign financing is something that countries should look at in a serious way, because that determines the message that gets out to the public. So I would say these three things: the registration, regulation of political parties, the internal establishment of standards of integrity, and the regulation of campaign financing.
Thank you.
Honorable, Sir Holiness, I think there's something in your speech today about the importance of civics, and I think you have highlighted something that is extremely serious in Jamaica that a lot of us tend to overlook, and let me explain my experience where that is concerned. So the Department of Government has a set of students that go out into high schools to talk about good governance, and accountability and transparency are just one of the 9 pillars of good governance. And as you said, efficiency, effectiveness, it's all connected. I was a bit amazed at the absence of any form of information to students in high schools about any of these things. And I think unfortunately, the University of the West Indies, for some courses, corrects this problem, but not everybody gets the opportunity to attend university. So the demographics of understanding and knowledge exists in Jamaica.
Question.
Oh, sorry. Just a question. Another question. There's a statement whereby this is a problem. And I think I like the position that you've taken, and I think this is something that not necessarily the opposition alone, but the government needs to address urgently to correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a hand over here.
Minister, you're right about the need for institutional review, but there's a certain character to Jamaican politics. Plus, the economy has been in recession for about 40 years. how do you reconcile the need for this review with the social and economic realities?
Well, it is because the institutions have lost their way why there is need for the review. In fact, the two things are not mutually exclusive. The entire process of structural reform, previously called structural adjustment, is just a small part of, well, that would be of a review of your economic structures. I am saying, yes, we need to review the economic structures, but we need to review the social and political, educational, religious, civil society, all the structures that feed into the economy.
Westminster as practiced in Jamaica, does it get into the way of implementing the kinds of changes that you're talking about?
The way in which we practice Westminster does. Yeah, the way in which we practice Westminster gets in the way of progress.
Okay.
Or
There's a hand over here.
Yes. There is a myth that the private sector is more efficient than the public. I'm not sure whether you intended to say that, but that could be one interpretation of what you...
Yes, it is an interpretation of what I've said, but I don't believe it is a myth. But I'm not debating the point. For me, it doesn't really matter who is more efficient. For me, what matters is what is the role of the government versus what is the role of the private sector. So if it is that you have an inefficient private sector, government's role is to get it efficient. So what we don't want to happen is for government to play the role of the private sector, because there is a role for the private sector. In my mind, government's role is to regulate, to step in when markets fail, to create markets where none exist, and to prospect for opportunity. That is the role of government.
Thank you very much. Oh, there's a hand. Okay. And I think we can only take one question after that one.
Okay, Mr. Holness, yeah. I think the discussion we're having now and the one we're about to have is a discussion about the efficacy of institutions in resolving a very enduring problem. And there's an important fact that was tabled earlier that bedevils my thinking that we need to reconcile. On the one hand, we have countries like Trinidad and Tobago, which is my country, and Jamaica, which have fairly developed series of institutions to deal with corruption and improper behavior in public office. And Jamaica has made this step with this stuff being put into Parliament. Trinidad is about to place a new procurement law into our Parliament and so on. And nonetheless, Trinidad and Tobago appear to be joined at the hip in these bad scores with Jamaica over the Transparency Index. Barbados, and I'm coming to a question for this speaker in the next panel, Barbados, which has a relatively undeveloped integrity and transparency framework in terms of institutions and laws,
You raised that, yes.
has the best score in the Caribbean. They're 15th, okay? Barbados is 15th in the world transparency score, corruption perception. And if we want to be scholarly, and I think we all do here, I'm not throwing words, if we want to be scholarly, we have to delve into that question.
Yeah.
What is the decisive reason? We have to reconcile this question. It's a paradox. So I'm asking you, and let's look at the next panel.
I'm very happy you raised the question because it would further elucidate the point I'm making. That whereas you could say the first phase of the anti-corruption framework was the development of legislation and the creation of various agencies to govern various aspects of corruption, I believe in the second phase, it is understood that the bureaucracy that we created have not all worked. They have not all been effective. And that the emphasis must always be on ensuring that the people who hold the offices and exercise the discretion are persons of the highest level of integrity, of judgment, and justice, because that is what ultimately will drive the perception. The perception of a high level of anti-corruption strength in the system is not going to be driven by the numbers of institutions or the numbers of legislation. It is going to be driven by the effectiveness of the leadership of the organization.
And the very last question, person has the mic.
Hello. Oftentimes when I hear politicians speak, I can't really differentiate the difference between development and economic growth. The terms seem to be used interchangeably. So my question is, a lot of the terms that we use tend to come from the business world. So what is the biggest danger or biggest issue with running a country like a business? And I say that too because we're from a jurisdiction here in Cayman where we raise a lot of revenue indirectly. So in your opinion, like, what is the biggest issue with running a country with using a lot of business?
Well, there is always a danger of trying to use markets to provide public goods. That's the biggest danger, because there are some public goods that simply should not be provided by the market, justice being one of them, public education possibly being another. So I think that, to me, that would be the danger. And yes, there is a distinction between growth and development. Growth refers to the literal physical increase of goods and services in your economy. And development refers to the increasing complexity but efficiency and effectiveness of the organization of the society. That's it. Thanks.
Put our hands together again. Thank you very much, Honorable Prime Minister. We appreciate it. Thanks again.